So when we score a field, we go out with a field map. We look at all the natural water sources present within the field, and these are always indicated as these green dots on your farm map. And we'd walk around, we'd check the impact at them and score it in a cumulative way. So one of the things we assess when we're scoring a winterage in summer is the impact of livestock on natural water sources. And here you can see a nice example of a weak spring on a winterage. This is where the flow trickles in. There's essentially an old trough under all this muck and dung. But because it's such a low flow and such a weak spring, the demand of the cattle for this supply is too much. And what happens then is that the surrounding wetland vegetation gets cut up and poached very rapidly. There's a lot of infill from mud, and also dung accumulates in the water source, and it actually doesn't really function as providing either a place for cattle to drink anymore, or as the habitat it could be. So if there's only one spring in this condition within a field, it may impact the field score by half a score class, so to speak. But if there's more than one spring, and many fields would have more than one spring, which are overused and being damaged by the livestock, it could well impact the score by full score class. And at that stage is when we need to really look at providing alternatives, because there's an impact on the field condition and also the payment for the farmer. So here we actually have an example of a spring. Although at the moment it's dry, you can see actually where the flow is, and there's some deposition of calcite. And the habitat otherwise is fully intact. All the vegetation, there's still a vegetation cover. There's a few marks of cattle hooves, but there's no real impact on the habitat, and there's no dung buildup. And overall, this is not impacting the field score at all. And the reason this is in a good condition is because there's a water trough which is piped from a water harvester right in the vicinity of the natural spring, so the cattle aren't forced to drink here, but they go to the much easier, cleaner supply only 30 meters away. So here we are essentially at what is a very well managed natural water source. The water source point itself is well protected by this manually built wall, and within it is a small retaining wall that holds in the water to a certain height. And that then generates enough pressure and pipe the water itself to a trough which is located just down the field. And this has mitigated all the impact from the livestock on this natural water source. The work involved in protecting this spring habitat, that being this stone wall built around it to keep the livestock out, is eligible for 75% funding. Then the provision of an alternative water source, that being the water trough positioned further away, and the piping and also the retaining wall built around to hold in the bit of water, is eligible for 50% funding. So the farmer benefited not only from the funding that was allocated for this positive work, but also directly from the impact it had on their field score, which finally went to a 10 after having been stuck on the 9 for a number of years. So this then had a financial benefit in their results-based environmental payment. So for winterage fields where there's either no water supply or the water supply is far down the mountain, an alternative to ensuring that the field still grazed out well in winter would be to provide a water supply on top of the hill. And here you can see a lovely rainwater harvesting unit that the farmer has set up. They built using natural limestone a ramp which they put a concrete cover over that feeds into a large water storage tank. This can hold enough water to provide the drinking water supply for the cattle throughout the winter period, and also to provide some water in late summer when then a light summer graze is needed. You can see the setting of which it's located is brilliant. There's a natural depression, there's a lovely white thorn tree that camouflages it, and the farmer has also put on recently a cover over the storage tank to prevent the risk of wildlife entering it and drowning, and then also contaminating the water, which can happen in the driest periods of summer. So another option to providing water would be actually these plastic water storage tanks. These can come in a range of sizes, and they're actually quite versatile, and they're also movable in a way. And this one is fed from a spring which is pumped up, and then it trickles down into a number of water troughs here spread across the winterage, and provides the water that the livestock need. So in summary, there's many options and possibilities available for providing alternative water for your cattle. So the first place to start is essentially look at your score sheet and see if there's any recommendations to improve the water setup in a particular field, because this is then something that will help get the score up. And although the funding rate is 50% for these tasks, the money can actually recoup itself in time, because the positive impact it can have on the field scores. And not only that, but the fields will be much easier to manage for yourself through the winter because you'll have the water that the cattle need to ensure the grazing is optimal.